Hello everyone, and thank you for watching the third video in the PowerApps and BPM using Flow series. If you haven't watched the first two videos, it might be a good idea to do that, just to give you some background as to what it is that we're actually doing here. So today we're going to discuss the JSON profiling and how we're doing that in Flow, and how we're ultimately going to use that in order to serve PowerApps and to make sure that PowerApps then behaves according to the process in Flow. So first we need to have a look at what is JSON. And I think that regardless of your job title or what it is that you do, if you can read JSON, I really think it's going to help you a lot going forward. I think it's becoming a standard globally for various technologies that talks to integration and etc. So this session, if you haven't worked with JSON before, we're going to give you a very quick crash course in JSON, but there are very valuable resources online where you can actually go and further your skills on the JSON technology. Alright, so let's jump into JSON, and basically what I'm using for this is Microsoft Visual Studio Code. Don't worry, I'm sure a lot of you guys ran for the hills when I spoke about Visual Studio, saying that you're not a developer. Don't worry about it. Visual Studio Code is a very lightweight text editor with some very strong and awesome functionality in it. So it's basically Notepad on steroids. So in Visual Studio Code you can change your language to specify that we're going to be working with JSON, and then from there it'll give you syntax and formatting and everything for JSON in Visual Studio Code. Alright, so to get started we're going to write our first JSON. And to do that, I'm just going to specify two curly brackets. And that is essentially a valid JSON packet or object. There's nothing in it and it's empty, but it is valid JSON. You can now start to describe whatever it is inside of this object by giving it key value pairs. What I mean by a key value pair is basically specifying the key. So we're going to start off and say we want to specify the process name. Then we're going to specify, give it a colon to tell it we're now going to pass the value for this attribute. And we're going to start off by calling this staff onboarding. So again, this is all valid JSON. If you pass this through a validator, it'll work just fine. And we can now extend this object by giving it more key value pairs. So let's say the process that we're busy defining is staff onboarding as per the introduction and the demos. So to add a second attribute, we need to specify a comma at the end of the line, and then we're ready to specify the next attribute. So we can go and say, not product, process ID for an example. Again, give it a colon, and then we're going to pass it the value. So the process ID that we're going to use is, let's call it onboarding 001. And that's what we're going to use as an identifier in Flow as well as PowerApps to refer the process or the application to the specific business process profile. Alright, so there we've got JSON with two attributes, and we're going to add a third attribute now, but that's going to be different in the fact that it's going to contain multiple values. So we now want to tell this process what the various process steps are that it's going to use. So if we go and specify that, it's screaming at me because I need to give it a comma behind the previous line, and there we've got process steps, and now we're going to give it an array, and we specify an array by giving it two square brackets. So anything that I now put inside of these two square brackets fall within the process steps array. Now, in this array, I can pass it multiple things. I can either pass it text, so I can say value 1, comma, value 2, and all of that will work well. Just want to do that. So that is a text array in the process steps attribute, but obviously that's not going to help us much. So what we want to do here is to actually be able to elaborate on the step detail. We actually want to pass this array with JSON objects. So we can now go and say there's going to be one JSON object for step 1, and there's going to be another JSON object for step 2 as an example. And just to do the formatting correctly, we're going to space these things out so we can actually see what's going on in them. Alright, so essentially just put these things on the same level so they look half decent. And just put that one there. So you'll see what Visual Studio Code does for you as well is as soon as you highlight a bracket, it'll show you the start and the end of the object that it is referencing, which is quite cool, especially if you start writing some hairy JSON files. Alright, so now we've got our process steps, and now we're going to pass attributes to it again. So the first attribute we want to do is step ID, and the value of that for the first step, let's call it step 1. It doesn't really matter what you call the ID, as long as it's uniquely identifiable throughout the various process steps. Alright, so let's go and pass it another attribute, and let's call that step name. And in here we can say new staff request. Alright, so you can now elaborate on this JSON. Remember that everything that I'm showing you is extremely customizable to your exact requirements. So if you feel that you don't need step instructions, which I can't see why you wouldn't, but if you feel like you don't want to have step instructions in the app, then you don't have to put this in. It really makes no difference. But let's go and put that in. So please complete the request for a new employee. So the idea is that we now profile these various business steps so that when PowerApps is in one of these steps, or the record in PowerApps is in one of these steps, that the relevant information from our profile will display in PowerApps, and that's how we get the dynamic behavior on that form. Alright, so in this example we're going to add, let's add, for an example, visible fields. And here again we're going to pass it an array, because now we're just going to give it text of objects which need to be visible during this step. So we're going to say we want the title to be visible, as well as the motivation, as well as the department. Okay, so let's put that there. So there we've got a list of the visible fields we're going to have. We can do the same with editable fields and mandatory fields and all of these sort of things. I'm going to show that to you in a second. Before we get there, I want to show you the next array, which is absolutely important, and this is the step options. And this is how we tell PowerApps what options to display to the user at the particular workflow step. So it's going to say step options, and the value of this is going to be an array. And inside the array, we now want to discuss or describe the various options. So these are going to be JSON objects. So let's use the first option, and option name is submit request. We might want to expand on that, and depending on the app that you're building, you can actually do quite a few things on the option as well. So in this case, we're going to do an option visible fields, and then we can pass it an array, and then you can also do option editable fields, and then pass it an array as well. And then you can pass the field names, and the idea with this is that as soon as a record is in a specific step, these fields over here would become visible. But as soon as the user selects an option, you might want to show additional fields, but you only want those fields or objects to display when they have that option selected. So that's very important for things like comments. As an example, if somebody sends a request back, or if they request information or they reject it, you typically want to get comments from the user on why they're doing that. Alright, so this should give you a basic understanding of JSON. To give you the full profile that we've been working with in the demos, I'm just going to paste this in here and then we can quickly run through this and discuss it. So here are all the fields that we've been working with. You'll see that, or all of the attributes we've been working with rather, sorry. So you will see visible fields with all of the list of the fields, editable fields, list of the fields, and then the mandatory fields. We can specify a list as well. So in this specific step, this is step 1 of the new staff request. We don't want any fields to be mandatory on the first step. We only want fields to be mandatory when you actually select the submit request option, and that's how we get the behavior that the fields or the objects turn red the moment you click on the option. Alright, and then similarly we've got step 2. The step name is what we use to define the status of the process. So if a record is in step 2, we automatically stamp the status as HR approval. And again, we then go ahead and update the step instructions to what is relevant to the user at that time in the process. You'll also see that we've got SLA duration. This could be handy to see how long do we expect a record to be in a specific step, and then you can do reporting and escalation based on that. So like I said earlier, you can easily customize these attributes. You can add to it, you can add additional attributes, and then later on when we get to the formulas in PowerApps, you'll see how you can actually then get access to these attributes and make them available to your Power App in that specific workflow step. So I think that concludes the introduction session to JSON. There are very good tutorials online that talks about JSON if you need to know more, if you want to know more. Things like json.org, it's very valuable information, and I'd really advise you to go and look at it. Like I said earlier, it's becoming the de facto standard for anything to do with web and integration. So it'll really help you regardless of your job title if you can read JSON. Okay, so now that we've got the business process profiled in JSON, we now need to store it somewhere that PowerApps can get access to it. And what we prefer is actually using a HTTP request response function in Flow. Flow is fantastic for that. There are so many things that you can do with Flow, but essentially this works very well for that. You'll see that we've got 2 flows here, the BPM profile provider and then the BPM submit. The profile provider is the one we're going to create now. So I'm not going to cheat, I'm not going to show you the existing one, I'm actually going to create a new one. So be kind if it breaks and I get errors. So essentially we create a new flow, we go and search for hundreds of connectors, and there really are hundreds of connectors lately, and we go and select the request trigger. And what this is going to give us is a URL that when you hit the URL, you can run this flow, and then as part of this flow you can put together a response to give or to hand to whatever accessed this URL. So first off, we're just going to specify a schema in the body of the request, and the reason for that is so that we can pass the process key to this flow to tell it which one of the business process it is that we want to get the profile for. And by doing this, you can have multiple profiles in one flow, and then you don't have to set up multiple flows and multiple custom connectors to connect to these flows. You can all do it in one, which is pretty neat. Okay, so there we've got the request, and you'll see that the URL is currently not available. It'll only be generated once you save this flow. So what we want to do is create a switch statement now, and the reason for that is to tell Flow to go and listen to the process key, which we're going to pass to it in the body, and then based on that select the business profile to return, or the process profile to return to whatever asked for it. So if in the switch statement we can go and select the process key, again absolutely kudos to the guys who developed this in the back end. I don't want to know what Flow does in the back end to make this happen, but it's phenomenal the fact that I've declared a process attribute, a process key attribute over there, now makes it available dynamically over here, and I can simply select it from a list. To the developers, hats off, fantastic stuff. Alright, so now I can go and say, if the process key that we're requesting is onboarding, I think we called it, let's just have a look, go back to, so this is actually staff onboarding. And if we now go back into flow, so paste that, so that's the key that we're going to pass to it, and then we can go and add another action which is now going to put together the response. So if we go and search for response, it's usually right at the bottom, so request response, and this time it's going to give us a response function. And all that we do now is paste that JSON into the body that it needs to respond with. So I'm just going into Visual Studio Code and finding that body, and I'm pasting it in there. Alright, so if I save this flow, theoretically it should have everything that it needs. So I confirm that all of that is fine. Yep, it looks like we are cooking. So let's save this, and if I didn't muck this up, it should save without any errors, which it does, which is fantastic. And this is generating this URL, which I can now go and copy, and it'll copy it to clipboard, and then I can use that URL in the custom connector to go and retrieve this JSON profile. So in future, if you want to change the business process profile, you simply come into this flow, you go and paste the new JSON into this, and the next time somebody launches PowerApps or that specific app, it'll get the new business process profile from Flow. Alright, so at this stage, to prove to you that Flow is doing what I'm saying it is, I'm going to open up Postman, and it's used to simulate web APIs. So you can actually see what will happen when a web API is triggered, and you can see the actual data. So this is fantastic for troubleshooting. And before you start trying to build a custom connector, first make sure that the information that you're getting from the Flow response is correct by using Postman. Alright, so if we go and paste that URL that we copied in the previous step into this, and we need to go and change the request type to post, and we need to go and tell it in the headers, because we're going to pass the process key to it, we need to go and specify the headers under content type to be application JSON. So we sort of warn the API that we're gonna give it something, and then in the body we said that we're going to give it the process key. So in here we can define JSON, and we can go and say process key, and the value for that is staff onboarding. So staff onboarding, and now theoretically if I hit send, it gives me my JSON object, and this is exactly what PowerApps is going to see when you set up your custom connector, and then you'll be able to suck all of this information into collections in PowerApps, and then the fact that it came from JSON or Flow is irrelevant. Then you use normal PowerApps formulas in order to use this data in your application. So before you close Postman, you need to go and save this. You can save it into a collection, and then during the next video we're going to use that collection to actually import it into the custom connector, which will give the custom connector the rule set, or big words, swagger file, that'll make the customer connector understand how to talk to the web request and response API. So that concludes our video for profiling the business process in JSON and serving that in Flow. Thank you very much for watching and for the great feedback that you've been sending us. The guys who've emailed us, thank you very much. We are really looking forward to setting up a couple of workshops where we discuss and talk BPM, and we want these to be interactive. Like we said, we want to donate the template that we're working on in this demo to the community, And if you want to be part of those workshops, please feel free to let us know and to get in contact with me. Contact details are on the screen. And thank you very much for your time. Join us next time where we're going to discuss the custom connector. And I'd suggest that you bring a cup of coffee or maybe something stronger for the custom connector. Have a good day. Cheers. Bye-bye.